The question hit the table so hard it felt like the lights flickered. My grandma looked straight at me and asked where the SUV was, the one she had given me last Christmas. And the room around me stopped moving, as if someone had shut off the air. She said it so calmly, almost gently, but the betrayal inside the words opened a crack in the night that would not close again. I sat there at the long dining table in my parents' home in Madison, Wisconsin, my fingers still curled around my fork, my mind refusing to make sense of the sound that had just left her mouth. The smell of roasted ham and cinnamon rolls hung warm in the air, but I felt suddenly cold, like someone had opened a door behind me. The chandelier above us hummed softly, the same chandelier I had grown up under. But the room felt foreign, as if I were sitting among strangers. I asked what she meant. My voice sounded thin, even to me. She repeated the question. Where was the SUV she bought for me? Why had I taken the bus from the airport instead of driving it? She was confused, she said, because she expected to see it in the driveway when she arrived earlier that afternoon. She had looked for it and did not see it. I told her the truth. I said I did not know what SUV she was talking about. I said I took the bus because it was cheap and predictable, and because rent in Cleveland did not pay itself. I said I did not even have a car. My life did not include anything with the letters S, U, or V in it. Grandma stared at me for a long moment. For the first time that evening, she looked tired. Not tired like she had traveled, tired, like something heavy had just landed on her chest. She had only been home for a few days after spending 18 months, consulting for a community health organization in Oregon. She was supposed to be resting. Instead, she sat there studying my face, searching for something I did not have. Then she turned her head toward Rachel. That tiny movement, slow and deliberate, was the loudest sound in the room. Dad lowered his eyes and reached for his napkin, though he did not seem to need it. Mom rushed to say something about how Christmas was not the time to talk about money or gifts, and how misunderstandings were normal after travel. Rachel lifted her wine glass and gave a faint smile, the kind of smile that told me she was not surprised by any of this. I did not know yet that I had just been handed the first piece of a puzzle everyone at that table had been solving behind my back. I did not know that something meant for me had been intercepted, redirected, repurposed, as if my life were a storage room where anyone could take what they wanted, without asking. If you are listening to this, I wonder what you are doing right now. Maybe you are cooking, folding laundry, driving home, or sitting somewhere warm with a cup of coffee. For me, when this moment happened, I was 29 years old, exhausted from hospital shifts, sitting in my childhood home with a family I thought I understood. If my grandma had not asked that question, I might have lived my whole life never knowing what had been taken from me. I need to step back a little. I need to tell you how Christmas night began. My name is Bella Whitmore. I am a medical resident in internal medicine. That means I work long hours, sleep in short bursts, eat whatever is available, and try not to make mistakes in a field where every mistake matters. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment in Cleveland. The rent is manageable if I work extra shifts. My budget is tight enough that I track every dollar that moves in or out. I do not complain. I picked this path, but nothing about my life includes expensive gifts or luxury cars. I flew home the morning of Christmas Eve. My shift at the hospital had ended at 5 a.m, and I left straight from work with my backpack and a coat that needed replacing. When my flight landed at Dane County Regional Airport, the wind chill stung my face the moment I stepped outside. I pulled my coat tighter, checked the time, and headed straight for the bus stop. The bus was late. It usually is in winter. I did not mind. No one was waiting on me except my parents, and they were used to me arriving quietly, slipping into the house without making a scene. The bus ride took nearly an hour. I watched familiar streets scroll past the fogged-up windows, the houses wrapped in lights, the yard decorations, the driveways already shoveled. It all looked exactly the same as when I left for college, but nothing in me felt the same. When you work in a hospital, you learn to stay calm through chaos. But nothing prepared me for how tense I always felt walking into my family, home. The front door opened before I had the chance to knock. Mom hugged me quickly, her perfume strong enough to sting my eyes. Dad shook my hand instead of hugging me. Rachel showed up from the living room, looked me up and down, said I looked tired, and went back to her phone. Her boyfriend Kyle wandered in a few minutes later to mention the weather and give me a nod that felt more like a dismissal. Grandma was the last to arrive. She stepped into the house with her cane and a scarf that still held the cold from outside. She hugged me longer and tighter than anyone else had. She told me I looked thinner. I tried to make a joke about hospital schedules and cafeteria food, but my voice cracked a little, and she noticed. She was always the one who noticed. Dinner began the way it always does. Too much food. Too many stories about people I barely remembered. Rachel talking loudly about her holiday plans and the places she and Kyle wanted to travel. Dad bragging about Rachel's new job. Mom laughed at everything Rachel said. No one asked much about my residency. When I tried to talk about it, I was interrupted. Rachel said hospitals were depressing. Kyle said he hated the smell of disinfectant. Dad said I should find a specialty that pays more. I cut into my ham without responding. I stopped trying to impress my family years ago. Grandma listened, though. She always listens. She asked me about my patients. She asked how my rotations were going. She asked if I was eating properly. I told her I was fine. I said it lightly, but she frowned anyway. The moment is so clear in my mind I could draw it. I had just taken a sip of water when she asked why I took the bus from that airport. The fork in my hand paused midair. Rachel glanced at me, then at Grandma, as if waiting for something. I said the bus was convenient. I said it was cheap. I said I did not want to spend money on a rideshare. Grandma nodded once. Then she asked where the SUV was. She asked it the same way someone might ask where a misplaced umbrella had gone. She asked about an SUV I had never seen. I asked what SUV she meant. My voice echoed a little in my ear. She explained that last Christmas, she bought me a midnight blue SUV because she knew I would be starting my residency, and she wanted me to have something safe. She said she worked with a dealership and had arranged the whole thing. She said she sent the paperwork. She said Mom told her I had received it. I felt my throat close. My vision tunneled slightly. My first instinct was to laugh because it sounded like a mix-up too ridiculous to be real. But no one else looked amused. Except Rachel. I told Grandma there must be a mistake. I said I never got a car. I said I did not own anything more valuable than my laptop and my stethoscope. I said I was barely scraping by, paying rent on time only because I picked up extra shifts. She stared at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. Then she looked at Rachel. Rachel lifted her chin and smiled. A slow, amused smile. It made my stomach twist. David reached for his wine glass but missed the stem slightly. Mom mumbled something about miscommunication and jet lag and the holiday. Stress. No one dared meet her eyes. I did not understand the depth of the betrayal yet. I only felt an ache rising in my chest. An ache that came from knowing something had happened around me, not to me, as if my life had been treated like a drawer someone could rummage through. Grand finally broke the silence. She asked when I last used the SUV. I said again, I never had one. She asked if I was certain the dealership did not contact me. I said yes. She asked if anyone had discussed it with me. I said no. Every answer I gave seemed to make her shoulders stiffen more. She tapped her cane against the floor, bare audible, but sharp enough to make Rachel flinch. I replayed the past year in my head, searching for any hint that something like this existed. Nothing. All I remembered was working, paying bills, worrying about loans, taking the bus, walking to work, sleeping in on rare mornings off, and trying not to collapse from exhaustion. Nothing about an SUV. She asked when I last talked to Mom about transportation. She said it so quickly it sounded rehearsed. David nodded in agreement without looking up. Rachel traced her finger along the rim of her wine glass. Something inside me cracked. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I saw that sense of ownership, that entitlement, that belief that she should have anything good that enters our family, even if it is meant for someone else. The moment stretched long enough to leave a scar. Grandma suddenly put her fork down. The sound of metal on porcelain was soft, but she asked Rachel if she had anything she wanted to say. Rachel shrugged and said she did not know what this was about. Dad cleared his throat again, louder this time. Mom whispered that this was not the right night to bring up confusion about gifts. I sat there with my heart pounding against my ribs so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Rachel took another sip of wine. Grandma watched her. In that tiny moment, something changed. I felt it in my bones. A thread had been pulled, and everything that had been tied tightly for years began to loosen. I looked around the table and realized I had grown up believing we were a family. But families do not hide cars meant for one daughter and give them to another. Families do not lie so smoothly that the person being lied to never has a chance to notice. The silence that followed felt heavier than any words could have been. Dinner resumed after a while, but it was not the same. Conversation started and stopped in awkward bursts. Dad dropped his fork twice. Mom overpraised every bite of food. Rachel excused herself to take a call that did not seem to be real. Grand barely touched her plate. I kept thinking about the year I had spent counting pennies while someone else drove something that was supposed to be mine. Later that night, when I finally went upstairs to the room I used to sleep in as a teenager, I lay on the old mattress and stared at the ceiling. I could still hear Grandma's question echoing in my head. "Where is the SUV I gave you last Christmas?" It sounded simple. It was anything but, because I knew now that the real question was not about the SUV. It was about what else had been taken. It was about who had decided I did not need to know. It was about how long they thought they could keep me in the dark. And most of all, it was about why my grandma's eyes had turned sharp when she looked at Rachel, sharp enough to cut the truth free. That night was the beginning. I did not know it yet, but a storm had started to gather around that table, quiet and steady, waiting for the moment it would finally break. When I woke up the next morning, the house was silent, the kind of silence that feels staged. I lay there for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling I had memorized as a teenager, and felt the same pressure in my chest that I used to feel before exams. Except this time, it was not fear of failing. It was the weight of finally realizing how little I knew about what happened inside my own family. I got dressed and went downstairs. Dad had already left for the hardware store. Mom was in the kitchen humming too loudly while wiping a counter that was already clean. Rachel was still asleep. Gran sat by the window with a mug of tea, watching the yard as if she were studying it. She looked calm, but I could tell she had not slept well either. Something inside her had shifted last night, and I suspected it was only the beginning. I told her good morning, and she smiled gently. She asked how I slept. I lied and said, fine. She did not correct me. She just nodded and went back to staring out the window. There was a heaviness between us now, not caused by distance, but by truth that had been forced into the open. I did not know what she planned to do, but I sensed she was thinking through every piece of the past year the same, the way I had been. I poured myself coffee, sat down across from her, and let my mind drift back to Cleveland, back to the life I lived every day, while an SUV with my name on it existed, somewhere out there, without me. Life as a medical resident is not something most people understand unless they have lived it. It is not glamorous, and it is not clean. It is exhaustion threaded through routine, triumph braided with failure, and patience learned through necessity. It is a world where every decision can change the course of a life, yet you still need to remember to sign your timesheet or you will not get paid. My days often begin at 5 in the morning, sometimes 4. Sometimes I do not go home at all. The hospital hallways have a way of swallowing time so completely that by the end of a shift, I cannot tell if I have been awake for 10 hours or 30. Internal medicine is a maze of diagnoses, one where the slightest detail matters. Chest pain that is dull rather than sharp. A fever that rises at night instead of during the day. A lab value that drops too quickly to be coincidence. There are days when I feel steady, capable, exactly where I belong. And then there are days when I stand in the medication room with my hand on my forehead, trying to remember the last time I ate something that was not packaged. In a vending machine. Residency pays enough to keep the lights on and the stove working, but it does not leave room for comfort. Not with my student loans. I chose to pay more than $3,500 each month because I refuse to carry debt into my 40s or 50s. Most residents do not do that. They choose the extended plans and save money now, but I could not let myself live that way. I wanted freedom sooner, even if it meant living tightly now. My apartment in Cleveland is small, a single bedroom, thin walls, a window that faces a parking lot. I keep only what I need, a mattress, a desk, a secondhand sofa, and a kitchen table that wobbles if you lean on it. I do not decorate much. I do not buy new clothes often. I bring my lunch in plastic containers and make coffee at home instead of buying it. I do not own a car, not because I do not want one, but because I cannot justify the cost. Insurance, maintenance, gas, parking fees, it adds up. So I take the bus. I ride with college kids and office workers and people who smell like cigarettes. I stand when it is crowded. I sit when there is space. I memorize the stops so well that I can feel where I am even with my eyes closed. People always assume I am strong. They say it like a compliment. Bella is fine. Bella can handle anything. Bella does not need help. Bella is independent. I used to take pride in that. Lately, it felt more like an excuse for them not to see me clearly. One night, about a month before Christmas, I was finishing a shift that felt endless. A man in his 70s had gone into cardiac arrest twice. A woman with uncontrolled diabetes needed emergency insulin. A college student had come in with symptoms that looked mild, but turned out to be meningitis. Every hour brought a new crisis. And by sunrise, my legs were shaking each time I walked between patient rooms. When my shift finally ended at 7 in the morning, I walked into the break room to grab my bag. My coworker, Megan Holt, was there. She is one of the nurses, sharp-minded, warm-hearted, and always ready with a joke when the day feels heavy. She noticed I was still wearing my winter coat, even though I had been inside all night. She asked where my car was parked. I told her I did not have one. She laughed in that kind, teasing way nurses do when they are trying to lift your spirits. She said she had never heard of a doctor who rode the bus to work. She said it made me unique. She said it with affection. But something inside me tightened anyway. I laughed along with her. But inside, there was a small sting. Not because she meant anything by it, but because deep down, I wished I did not have to live the way I was living. I wished I could be the kind of resident who could afford to drive home after an overnight shift, instead of waiting in the cold for a bus that might be late. But wishing does not make anything change. I chose my priorities. I chose long-term freedom over short-term ease. Still, that comment echoed in my head more than it should have. When I finally got home that morning, I collapsed onto my bed without even taking off my shoes. I slept for 3 hours, woke up, made instant oatmeal, and walked back to the hospital. That was my life, day in, day out. Work, sleep, pay bills, keep moving. And all that time, my family thought I was fine. Perfectly fine. They did not know how often I calculated my budget in the grocery store aisle. They did not know how many times I had chosen not to turn on the heat until late at night. They did not know how embarrassed I felt when my coworkers talked about weekend road trips or new furniture or vacations. They did not know that I carried every burden quietly because I believed that was what a grown woman was supposed to do. But now, sitting at the kitchen table across from Grandma, I realized that the worst part was not that my family did not know. It was that they never asked. Grand finally looked away from the window and met my eyes. She asked if I wanted toast or eggs. I said I was not hungry. She waited a moment, then nodded, as if she understood that food was not what I needed. I wanted answers. I wanted to know why an SUV had been purchased for me and never reached me. I wanted to know who intercepted it. I wanted to know who signed for it. I wanted to know who had been driving it and why. I wanted to know what else had been hidden from me under the blanket of family, politeness. But I could not ask yet. Not because I was afraid, because I could feel that she was already thinking through the questions herself, and something told me she needed time to build the foundation for whatever came next. Mom came into the room then with a bright smile that did not reach her eyes. She asked if we slept well. Grandma said she slept adequately. I said I slept fine. Mom clapped her hands together as if relieved, then started talking about her plans for the day, how she wanted to drive by the lake or visit a nearby church display. Her words were too fast, her gestures too big. She was trying to fill the silence with noise so she would not have to acknowledge what happened last night. Dad arrived home around 10 with bags from the store. He said hello quickly and asked if anyone wanted coffee from the diner. His voice was steady. but his eyes flicked toward me and then away in less than a second, as if looking at me too long would force him to see the truth he had been avoiding. Rachel came downstairs around 11, hair perfectly styled, wearing a sweater that looked new. She kissed Mom on the cheek, hugged Dad, nodded at Grandma, and then gave me a quick smile that felt like a challenge. The sight of her made something tighten in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to recognition. The kind you feel when a puzzle starts taking shape in your hands before the pieces are even fully turned upright. We all moved around the house for a while, pretending to be normal, but normal had already left. The air in the house felt tense, stretched thin. Every conversation seemed to bend around the unspoken truth. Every glance between adults carried an undercurrent of something simmering. By noon, I felt restless. The ache of not knowing was worse than exhaustion. I went outside to breathe. The cold air burned my lungs, but it grounded me. I wrapped my coat around myself and walked down the driveway. I thought about the past year, the bus rides, the long nights, the careful budgeting, the shame that came whenever someone assumed doctors were wealthy, the pride I carried in being independent, the loneliness that came with it. I thought about how easily my family accepted that I would be fine, how quickly they believed I did not need anything. And then I thought about Grandma's face when I told her I did not know about the SUV. The sadness there, the disappointment, the determination. Something was coming. I could feel it in my bones. I turned back toward the house and saw Grandma watching me from the window. She did not look away. She held my gaze for a long moment. And in that quiet exchange, I felt the first tremor of truth beginning to rise to the surface. Whatever had been hidden was not going to stay hidden much longer. When I came back inside, the house felt warmer than before, almost too warm. Mom was bustling around the kitchen again, pretending to rearrange utensils that did not need rearranging. David sat at the dining table, flipping through a newspaper he was not actually reading. Rachel stood at the counter, spreading cream cheese on a bagel, humming a tune that sounded intentionally cheerful. Gran sat in the armchair closest to the window, the same spot she always chose. She looked up when she heard me, then motioned for me to sit across from her. Her expression was calmer now, but there was a fire in her eyes I recognized. It was the look she got when she had made up her mind about something. I sat down, waiting, not wanting to rush her. She folded her hands around her tea mug and studied me for a moment before speaking. She asked if I remembered the last time we had talked on the phone before she left for Oregon. I said yes. She had called me late one night while I was on a short break from my rotation. She had asked me what I ate that day. She had asked whether my apartment felt safe. She had asked if I was feeling overwhelmed. She always asked those things. She never called my parents to get updates about me. She called me directly. She said she trusted my voice more than secondhand information. She did not like middlemen. She did not like guessing games. If she wanted to know whether I was safe or tired or stressed, she asked me, not Mom, not Dad, not Rachel. She reminded me of the night I told her I had been walking home from a late shift because the bus schedule had changed, and I was too tired to wait for the next one. It was late into the night and snowing, and I had walked nearly 2 miles in the cold wind. I had not mentioned it because I wanted sympathy. I had mentioned it because I knew it would make her worry, and somehow I wanted someone in the world to care. She remembered the exact words I said. I told her I was fine. I told her I was used to it. She told me she did not like the idea of me walking in the dark. I told her it was unavoidable. She argued, gently but firmly, that my safety mattered more than my pride. That was the first moment she began considering the idea of buying me a car. I had not known that until now. She took a slow sip of her tea, then continued. She said she had spent months watching from a distance, hearing my voice grow thinner with exhaustion. She said each time I told her I was fine, she knew I was only telling her the surface of the truth. She said she could hear the weight I carried, even when I did not want anyone to see it. She told me something then that made my throat tighten. She said she did not choose to help me because she loved me more than Rachel. She chose to help me because I needed it more, and she believed family should respond to need, not noise. She said Rachel had been given a great deal throughout her life. Support with her tuition, help with her rent when she moved in with Kyle, a loan for her cosmetology license, assistance with her down payment for her apartment. She listed it calmly, as if reciting facts, not judgments. Gran was not a woman who acted out of emotion. She acted out of principle. She said she wanted to balance things. She said fairness mattered to her. Not favoritism, but fairness. That was her second reason for choosing me. The third reason was the one she spoke about last. It was the reason that seemed to change something deep inside her when she said it. She said she wanted me to have something in my name that no one else could touch. Something that could not be manipulated or redirected or claimed by someone louder or more demanding. She said she knew I did not ask for anything, but that was why she wanted to give me something secure. Something that represented stability, something that would make my life easier during the hardest years of residency. I listened silently as she explained all this. My hands were folded in my lap, and I realized I was gripping them tighter than I thought. I had never heard her speak so openly about why she made the choices she made. My family often accused her of being stubborn or old-fashioned, but in truth, she was one of the most deliberate people I had ever known. I asked her when she decided to buy the SUV. She said it was shortly before she left for Oregon. She said she wanted to surprise me at Christmas, knowing I would be home at least for a day or two before returning to the hospital. She said she imagined me pulling into the driveway in a car that was safe and warm, and instead of stepping off a freezing bus carrying a backpack too heavy for myself, shoulders. I asked how she arranged everything. She said she had called Dad and explained her plan. She said she trusted him. She said she believed he would keep the car safe until I came home. She said she believed he would be proud that she was giving me something that represented independence and security. She believed Mom would be happy for me. She believed Rachel would understand. She believed the family would gather for Christmas, and she would watch my face light up as they handed me the keys she had wrapped in a small box. The thought of that made her voice shake, just slightly. She said she signed the papers at the dealership herself. She chose the color, midnight blue, because she knew I liked dark colors that did not draw too much attention. She added a safety package. She insisted on heated seats because she knew I left home early and came back late in the freezing winter months. She prepaid maintenance for the first 2 years so I would not have to worry about unexpected expenses. She did it all with the intention of easing some part of my life. I sat there listening, picturing the car, picturing her signing the papers, picturing the image she had in her mind of me receiving it. It made my chest ache in a way I could not describe. Then she told me when the keys were handed to Dad and Mom. It was in early December of the previous year. She said she told them to hold on to the car until she returned from Oregon. She wanted all of us together when the surprise was revealed. She wanted it to be a moment we shared as a family. She had trusted them. That was what stung the most. She had trusted them completely. She said she never suspected anything was wrong because each time she asked about the car, Mom told her not to worry. Mom told her I loved it. Mom told her I used it every day. Mom told her I said thank you and that I was grateful. Mom kept describing my supposed reactions in detail. Grandma believed it. I felt my stomach twist when she said that. I remembered every bus ride, every cold walk, every moment I counted the coins in my bag before buying groceries. I remembered all of it while another version of my life was being narrated to Grandma, without my knowledge. I asked her why she did not check with me directly. She said she wanted the surprise to stay intact. She said she thought it would make me happy at Christmas. She said she never imagined my parents would betray her trust. She said some betrayals cut deeper because they come from people who know exactly how much faith has been placed in them. She said she felt guilty for involving them. She said she wished she had sent the keys to me directly. She said she wished she had asked more questions earlier, but she did not blame herself. She blames the people who had chosen deception when honesty would have cost them nothing. I asked her when she realized something was wrong. She said it was last night when she saw me walk into the dining room with shoes that looked worn down and a coat that was thinner than it should have been for winter. She saw the exhaustion in my face. She realized immediately that no one driving a new SUV every day would look as drained as I did from the simplest commute. She said she noticed Rachel wearing a new bracelet. She noticed the bag Kyle carried that cost more than any bag he had before. She noticed the way Rachel's smile flickered when the question about the SUV came up. Grandma said she was not a woman who believed in coincidences. She believed in patterns, and last night, she saw the pattern clearly. She placed her hand on mine. Her grip was gentle but firm. She told me her intentions were never about favoritism. They were about fairness. She said Rachel had always been supported because Rachel asked loudly. I never asked, so I was overlooked. Not because I was less loved, but because I was quieter. She said she wanted to correct that. She said giving me the SUV was not a reward. It was an act of faith, a recognition of my hard work, a gesture toward my safety, and a statement that I deserved stability just as much as anyone else. I felt heat rise in my throat. My eyes stung, but I blinked it back. I did not want to cry at that moment. I wanted to understand every corner of what had happened. I told her I appreciated everything she did. I told her I did not blame her. I told her I was grateful for her intention, even if I never saw the gift. She nodded as if she already knew that. Then she leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. She said she wanted the truth. She said she was going to get it. She said she had been quiet long enough, and she was tired of people mistaking her kindness for weakness. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw Rachel standing in the doorway holding her phone. She had come downstairs again, but this time she did not look smug or relaxed. She looked uneasy, like she had walked into a room where she was not welcome. Grandma watched her closely. The silence between them was thick and electric. Rachel froze in the doorway as Grandma said she had questions and that Rachel would answer every one of them. The words rang out like a warning bell. Rachel blinked once, tucked her phone into her sweater, and tried to smile. But the edges shook. I stayed in my seat, alert, my pulse tight under my skin. Gran wasn't raising her voice, not accusing, not demanding. She didn't need to. Her calm was harder than shouting. Rachel attempted casual. She asked what Grandma meant, lifted her shoulder, pretended she was confused. But Grandma watched her with that same focused patience she used when negotiating contracts or calling out liars politely enough that they didn't realize they'd lost until the meeting ended. Whatever Rachel expected, it wasn't the silence that followed. She shifted her weight, muttered something about needing to get ready for plans with Kyle, gestured toward the stairs. Grandma told her she could get ready afterward. Her voice was steady, cold enough that Rachel stopped mid-step. David appeared in the hallway holding a mug of coffee he almost dropped when he felt the air. Mom hovered behind him with a dish towel, eyes darting nervously between us. They felt it too. Something was coming undone. Grand asked Rachel when she last spoke to the dealership. Rachel stiffened. She said she didn't know what dealership Grandma meant. Grand asked if she had ever driven a midnight blue SUV. Rachel shook her head too quickly. She said no. She said she barely liked SUVs. Everyone heard the lie in her voice. Gran let her finish stumbling through excuses. Then she stood straighter, her cane barely touching the floor. She said she remembered everything clearly. She remembered the date she bought the SUV, the call where Dad agreed to hold it, the message Mom sent thanking her for the generous gift. She remembered every detail. She asked again, "Where was the SUV?" Rachel's breath hitched. She looked at Dad, hoping for rescue. He avoided her gaze. Mom stepped forward, suggesting gently that they talk privately. Gran said no. She said this conversation belonged in the light. Secret had already done enough damage. Rachel's face drained. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, but stayed quiet. I had waited too long for clarity. Rachel said she didn't want to discuss this in front of everyone. Grandma told her it involved everyone, especially me. Rachel forced a laugh and said I was overreacting, that nothing about this was a big deal. My anger ignited clean and sharp, not wild, just precise. I asked her directly if she knew about the SUV. Rachel looked anywhere but at me. The floor, the window, her hands. Then she whispered that it was complicated. Complicated was a confession. Gran nodded once, as though confirming a theory she already knew. She said she expected more truth to uncover, and intended to uncover all of it. Dad finally spoke, urging everyone to calm down. Mom touched Rachel's arm as though comforting the victim, not the person causing harm. Grandma sat down again, composed and resolute. She said she wanted to understand how the SUV she bought never reached me. Why did no one tell her the truth? Why she had been lied to for an entire year? Rachel didn't answer. She turned and walked out, her steps unsteady. Mom hurried after her. Dad muttered something about checking something in the garage and disappeared. Grandma stayed in the dining room. She let out a long breath and closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she looked tired but unwavering. She said secrets rot the foundation of a family long before anyone notices them. Cracks. I didn't know what to say. It felt like the floor under my life had been sliding for years, and only now was I seeing the tilt. I sat with Grandma until she said she needed a moment alone. She walked slowly into the guest room and closed the door with quiet finality. I went upstairs to my old room, hands trembling. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall as memories sorted themselves into a pattern I had never recognized before. Christmas the previous year. I remembered it with perfect clarity. I had worked an overnight shift on Christmas Eve, sleeping a few hours on a cot before jumping back into rounds. I called my parents briefly. They had dinner without me. Rachel posted photos at a table set in gold and red. No one suggested postponing the celebration. I told myself it was fine. During that call, Dad mentioned Grandma sent something for me but said not to worry. They'd hold on to it. I assumed it was a small gift, a book, a scarf. No one mentioned it again in the spring. Or in the summer. Grant had already left for Oregon then, so I didn't get to ask her. I chalked it up to misunderstanding. Or maybe the gift had been meant for Rachel. Things flowed her way naturally. I learned years ago not to expect more. But now, replaying everything, it felt like puzzle pieces snapping into place. Around January, Rachel started posting new kinds of photos. She and Kyle at a lake. She and Kyle at a winery. She and Kyle beside a midnight blue vehicle, only half in frame, captions like weekend escape and spontaneous adventures. I saw the pictures. Not once did my mind connect them to anything of mine. I assumed they borrowed a car. Or Kyle upgraded his. Why would I question something that had never been explained to me? But now that I remembered the angle of the hood, the color of the paint, the shine in the winter sun, all of it clicked into a single, undeniable picture. They were driving what should have been mine. Heat flooded my face. I stood and paced the room, my heart hammering. Dad had said Rachel earned a break. Mom had said traveling would help them grow as a couple. Rachel bragged at Thanksgiving about how she and Kyle traveled so often, despite being on a budget. Of course they could. They weren't paying for gas, insurance, or maintenance. I had paid for bus passes, for rent that barely covered heat, for cheap groceries, for nights walking home in the dark. They had been living inside a gift meant to keep me safe. The betrayal wasn't only that they took it, it was that they watched me struggle without ever thinking to stop. The doorbell rang downstairs. I froze. Dad answered. I heard Kyle's loud, cheerful voice, always eager to impress. He greeted Dad, Mom, then Rachel. They moved back toward the dining room. I sat at the top of the stairs, out of sight. Kyle started talking immediately. He said how cold it was outside, how bad the roads were, how amazingly the car handled. He said he felt lucky to have something so reliable, something that made traveling easy, something he never thought he would have access to. Mom chuckled and said she was glad he liked it. Kyle laughed and said he didn't just like it, he loved it. Rachel didn't correct him. Dad asked if they planned another trip. Kyle said yes. They wanted to drive to Minnesota next month to see ice castles. He said the car made everything possible. My stomach twisted. My hand covered my mouth to stop the sound building in my throat. It confirmed everything. Then I heard Grandma's cane tapping against the floor. She entered the room and asked one question. Which car was he talking about? Silence. Thick and instant. Kyle stammered. He thought everyone knew. I thought it was fine. Thought it was a shared family asset. Grandma said nothing. She waited. Rachel's voice finally came, thin and frayed. She said everything was complicated. Gran said she was done hearing that word. She wanted the truth. Footsteps followed, slow and controlled. She was moving through the house, following the trail of a secret that had been kept from me for almost a year. I gripped the railing at the top of the stairs as my heart pounded. The truth was finally coming for all of us. Gran's footsteps moved toward the dining room, steady and unhurried, the soft tap of her cane echoing like a slow countdown. I came down the stairs, one careful step at a time. When I reached the bottom, I found everyone exactly where they had been, frozen in the tense air they had created. Kyle stood by the doorway, jittery and restless. Mom hovered protectively beside Rachel, whose expression teetered between defensive and guilty. Dad pretended to study a receipt near the kitchen island. Gran stepped into the center of the room and rested one hand on the back of a dining chair. She didn't sit. She simply looked around, letting silence slice through everyone until the air felt thin. She asked Dad where the SUV paperwork was. Dad blinked, a small blink, but enough to reveal everything. He rubbed his neck and tried to smile. He said things were getting blown out of proportion. He said Christmas wasn't the right time for confrontation. He said misunderstandings should be settled privately. He said the whole thing was more complicated than Grandma realized. Gran lifted her chin. She said she was asking a very simple question. If she bought an SUV a year ago, someone would have signed for it. Someone had registered it. Someone had taken possession. She wanted to know who. Dad swallowed and looked at Mom. Mom stepped forward with a strained smile and said it was all a mix-up, a harmless confusion that had spiraled unexpectedly. She said I shouldn't be upset because everything would be explained. She said emotions were high. She said no one meant any harm. I watched her closely. Every word she spoke was a cushion for the truth, a soft blanket thrown over sharp corners. It was the same tone she used when she used to tell me everything was fine, even when it wasn't. Grandma didn't blink. She asked again where the paperwork was. Dad cleared his throat. He said he would look for it later. Maybe it was in a drawer somewhere, maybe with the insurance papers. Maybe he had misplaced it. Grandma told him he'd had an entire year. Her words hit harder than any accusation. Rachel suddenly stepped forward. Arms crossed, chin lifted. She said she didn't understand why this was being treated like a scandal. She said it was just a car. She said I was being dramatic. She said I didn't even need it because soon I'd be a doctor. And once I was making real money, I could buy whatever I wanted. She said it casually, almost lightly, but the entitlement beneath it was unmistakable. You will be a doctor. You will be fine. Those words hung in the air like dust after a collapse. They weren't encouraged. They were justified. The justification they had used for years. A cold feeling moved through me. I asked her why she thought I'd be fine. I asked if she understood what my life looked like. I asked if she knew how much my student loan payments were. If she knew what rent cost in Cleveland. If she knew what walking home at night felt like. If she knew how many shifts I worked simply to avoid slipping behind. Rachel rolled her eyes. She said residents were paid well enough. She said my life would be easy soon. She said she and Kyle traveled more and needed the SUV for their lifestyle. She said it made more sense in their hands. Gran's gaze shifted from her to me, then back again, like she was assembling a puzzle. I took a breath. For the first time that night, I let myself speak the truth plainly. I said residency paid for groceries and the basics, but not comfort. I said nearly every spare dollar went toward loan payments because I refused to drag debt through decades. I said I often worked extra shifts just to afford rent. I said I walked home at night because I couldn't afford a car. I said I skipped meals to save money. I said I lived simply because I wanted to build a future without burdening anyone. Mom flinched when I mentioned skipping meals. Dad's eyes darted away. Rachel looked annoyed, as if my struggles were an inconvenience to her narrative. I said the SUV would have made a real difference, and the worst part wasn't losing the car. It was knowing someone had decided I didn't need it. The room shifted then, just like in the hospital when the final piece of a diagnosis clicks into place. Understanding and dread intertwined. David tried again to soften everything. He said Rachel needed the car more at the time. He said she'd been going through a rough patch with work. He said he assumed I wouldn't mind because I was strong and independent. He said the family had always relied on me to figure things out. He said it like a compliment. Grandma straightened, looking at him with a disappointment so sharp it felt like the temperature dropped. She asked if he understood fairness, responsibility, trust. She asked how he justified taking something meant for one granddaughter and giving it to another without permission. Dad mumbled about intentions. He said he meant well. He said he wanted what was best for the family. Gran's face didn't soften. Mom tried again. She said she told Grandma every month that I loved the car because she didn't. Do you want to worry her? She said she didn't want Grandma to feel disappointed. She said she assumed things would eventually settle themselves. She said she thought I wouldn't care once I made more money. Grandma asked her why lying seemed easier than telling the truth. Mom had no answer. Rachel's voice cut back in, thinner now. She said my future would be stable and successful, and hers never would. She said it made sense for me to sacrifice more now because I'd be rewarded later. She said I had more potential and opportunities. She said I was meant to be fine. You will be fine. You will be fine. You will be fine. The phrase unraveled in my mind, revealing what it had always been. Not encouragement, not confidence. Permission for them to overlook me. I asked Rachel if she understood that taking something meant for someone else was wrong. She said I was being dramatic. She said she hadn't stolen anything. She was just borrowing a car that wasn't being used. She said families shared things. She said I should be grateful she was honest about it. Gran's voice sliced through the air. She told Rachel to stop talking. Rachel closed her mouth instantly. Grandma stepped forward and said she had heard enough. Trust had been placed in the wrong hands. She said she wanted the registration information immediately, the keys, every document tied to the SUV. No one moved. She stared at Dad until he finally said he would get them. He took one step toward the office before Grandma told him to stop. Her voice was sharper than I had ever heard. She said she didn't trust him to retrieve anything alone. Dad froze. Then Grandma said something none of us expected. She had already called her lawyer. The room went silent in a way that felt dangerous. Mom gasped. Dom muttered that this was unnecessary. Rachel looked at Grandma as if she were the one who had been betrayed. Gran said she made the call early that morning, after realizing the SUV had never reached me. She wanted legal clarity. She wanted records. She wanted protection for me and accountability for them. She said the lawyer was on his way. Mom covered her mouth. Dad shook his head. Rachel whispered something panicked to Kyle. Gran turned to me and said she didn't want me to doubt myself anymore. She didn't want me to carry burdens alone. She would not let anyone hide the truth from me again. I felt her words settle deep inside me, anchoring something that had been drifting for years. Then the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the house, sharp and final. Dad stiffened. Mom clutched Rachel's hand. Even Kyle went pale. Grandma looked toward the entryway with calm certainty. The lawyer had arrived. I heard footsteps first, firm and steady against the hardwood floor. And the quiet shift in the room told me everyone heard them too. The crack in the illusion of our family dinner widened as Daniel Brooks stepped into the dining room carrying a leather folder tucked under his arm. He was tall, sharply dressed, and composed in a way that made the entire scene feel less like Christmas and more like a courtroom waiting for the first gavel strike. He nodded politely, but his eyes were focused and businesslike, and the warmth that had filled the room earlier evaporated. Grandma lifted her chin slightly, a small gesture that told me she had expected this moment. She had invited him. She had prepared for this. My stomach tightened as Daniel pulled out a chair and settled beside her as if he had done this 100 times. David shifted in his seat, suddenly unable to stay still. Mom pressed her napkin against her lips. Rachel crossed her arms and leaned back, eyes half-lidded like she found all of this dramatic and unnecessary. Daniel opened the leather folder, revealing a thick stack of documents, insurance statements, registration papers, photocopies of signatures. He placed the first sheet in the center of the table. My breath caught when I saw my own name printed there in black ink. It felt unreal. I had never touched these papers. I had never even known they existed. Yet there it was. My name is listed as the registered owner of a brand new SUV. He said calmly that the vehicle had been purchased last year and paid in full by Grandma. He said the registration had been completed properly and legally. Proof of payment was recorded. Insurance policies were up to date. Everything had been done correctly. Except one thing. I had never received the car. The truth was laid out on the table in a way no one could argue with. Dad cleared his throat, a nervous sound I had rarely heard from him. He tried to compose himself, but his hands fidgeted with the edge of his placemat. Daniel continued speaking in the same calm, clipped tone that sent a shiver down my spine. He said the dealership had delivered the SUV to my parents' home the week before Christmas last year. He said the keys had been handed directly to Dad, along with the registration packet that included my name as the legal owner. He said the dealership had a time-stamped delivery log with Dad's signature on it. Dad glanced at Mom as if asking for help, but she looked down at her lap. I watched the silence between them stretch, thick and uncomfortable. Then Dad finally spoke. Not an apology, not an explanation that made sense, just a flimsy excuse that hung in the air like damp fog. He said he had kept the SUV at home because I had been too busy to come back from Cleveland. He said he had intended to tell me. He said he thought it would be more convenient that way. He said the weather had been bad, and he did not want me driving an unfamiliar car on icy roads. Grandma inhaled sharply, and I felt her anger, even though she did not raise her voice. Her eyes were icy and steady as she watched him talk. She asked Dad why he never told me the SUV was there, why he never called the dealership to confirm anything. Why did he let an entire year pass without mentioning the gift? David started to answer, but faltered. He looked lost for a second. Then he attempted a shrug, saying that it had simply slipped his mind. It sounded absurd, childish, and painfully rehearsed. Rachel rolled her eyes like the whole thing was getting ridiculous. She said Dad was overthinking it, and that this entire situation was being blown out of proportion. She added that the SUV had not gone to waste. She and Kyle had used it responsibly. She said that at least someone had put the vehicle to good use, instead of letting it collect dust. The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel lifted another document, this time a series of photos printed on glossy sheets. Security camera images, captured at grocery store parking lots, gas stations, Kyle's workplace, even the entrance to a lakeside cabin. Rachel and Kyle stepping in and out of the SUV, loading camping gear, driving through town, laughing in one of the frames, Kyle with his sunglasses pushed up, and Rachel leaning against the hood like the car belonged to her. I felt something inside me twist hard. Daniel explained that insurance records showed multiple service appointments over the past year under my name. Oil changes, tire rotations, routine maintenance, payments charged to a card that was not mine, all organized by Dad or by Rachel. None of these charges ever passed through my bank. None of them reached me. I had been paying down my student loans with every spare dollar, living on the edge of my own finances, while someone else rode around in a brand new SUV that legally belonged to me. Mom finally spoke, her voice trembling. She said this whole thing was a misunderstanding. She said they had only kept the SUV safe for me. She said I worked too hard and was never home long enough to enjoy it. She said they thought it was better to give it to someone who could use it, until I was less busy. Grand stared at her for a long moment, then asked a simple question. Why did no one tell Bella about the car at all? Mom hesitated, searching for something to say. I braced myself. She said it did not seem necessary. She said I was doing fine. She said I never asked for anything, and that she assumed I did not need them. SUV. Daniel placed another page on the table, a document confirming that no legal transfer of ownership had ever been filed. Rachel and Kyle had been driving a vehicle that did not belong to them. Dad and Mom had participated in withholding it, and all of them had done so quietly, without a word to me, for an entire year. Rachel let out a tired sigh. She said I should not be upset because I hardly came home. She said it was not like I would have used the SUV much. She said I spent all my time buried in medical charts and night shifts. She added, almost mockingly, that I would be a doctor soon and could buy my own car, probably something nicer. She said I would be fine. The words hit me harder than I expected. They echoed the same pattern that had followed me since childhood, Rachel being the one who needed help, while I was the one who did not deserve any, because I was strong. Rachel being the one who struggled, while I was the one expected to handle everything alone. Daniel asked Dad and Mom if they had ever sought my permission to let Rachel and Kyle use the SUV. Dad admitted they had not. Mom admitted they had not considered it necessary. Rachel did not bother answering. She leaned forward, lifting her chin with a kind of entitlement that made my skin crawl. She said Grandma always favored me. She said I got enough attention from the family already. She said the SUV would have been wasted on me because I did not have a social life. She said Kyle needed it to get to work, and that it helped them both. She said the gift had come at the perfect time for them. She almost sounded proud of that. Gran's hand closed around the edge of her placemat, knuckles turning white. She asked Daniel to continue. Daniel lifted the next sheet of paper, a formal ownership confirmation from the DMV. My name, no one else. No transfer. No authorization granted. No loophole. No misunderstanding. He said Rachel and Kyle's use of the vehicle amounted to unauthorized possession. He said the usage of insurance under my name without my consent constituted fraud under state law. He said service charges billed to accounts that were not mine but authorized under my name raised further legal issues. He said none of it would hold up under scrutiny. He said the paper trail painted a clear picture. Dad swallowed hard. Mom murmured something about family loyalty. Rachel's face lost its smugness for the first time that night. She asked what the big deal was. She said everything could be fixed with a conversation. She said there was no reason to involve a lawyer. She said Grandma was overreacting. Gran looked at her with a coldness I had never seen in her eyes before. She said this was not a misunderstanding. She said this was betrayal. She said this was theft. The word hung heavy in the air. Rachel protested loudly, saying it was harsh, unfair, and exaggerated. She said Grandma was choosing sides. She said I was not a victim, and that I needed to stop acting like one. She said she and Kyle had only taken the SUV because it seemed available. She said no one had told them not to use it. Daniel reminded her that no one had the right to use it except me. Rachel rolled her eyes again, but her expression cracked. Kyle had not said a word the entire time, but now he shifted uncomfortably. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but closed it again when Dad shot him a warning glare. Daniel set his pen down and folded his hands neatly. His voice stayed calm. He said the facts were clear. The vehicle had been intended for me, delivered to my parents' home, withheld from me for nearly 12 months, used extensively by Rachel and Kyle, maintained through unauthorized charges, documented through insurance records and camera footage, never legally transferred, never mentioned to me. He said none of this aligned with an innocent misunderstanding. My hands felt cold. My chest felt tight. The truth was so obvious now. All the pieces fit together too cleanly. That year of walking in the freezing Cleveland wind. That year of riding the bus to night shifts. That year of calculating pennies. That year of fear while crossing empty streets at 4 a.m. That year could have been safer. It could have been easier. It could have been less lonely, but someone else had taken what was meant for me. Grand whispered my name softly. When I looked at her, I saw grief in her eyes. Grief for the year I had spent alone. Grief for the help I never received. Grief for the trust she had placed in my parents that they had thrown away. Rachel's voice cut through the silence again. She said this entire thing was pointless. She said the SUV belonged to the family. She said it did not matter who had used it. She said I was making a scene for no reason. She said everyone knew I would be fine without it. I took a slow breath, feeling the floor beneath my feet steady itself. For once in my life, I was not going to swallow my feelings. Not tonight. Daniel looked at Grandma. She gave a single nod. He announced that since there had been no legal transfer of ownership, the SUV was still mine. Fully, completely, undisputed. He said any continued use by Rachel or Kyle after tonight would be considered unlawful. He said they were to cease possession immediately. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly behind him. He said this was unfair. He said I was tearing the family apart. He said we could talk about this privately. He said lawyers had no place in a family discussion. Gran told him it stopped being a family discussion the moment he hid the SUV from me. Silence fell again. The fracture that had opened at the start of dinner split wider. And as I looked around the table, I realized it was the first time in my life that the truth finally had a place in this house. The night was far from over. The moment Grandma announced that the SUV was to be returned immediately and that any further use by Rachel or Kyle would be unlawful, the room shifted. It was subtle at first, like the air thickened and the temperature dropped all at once. Dad froze with his hands still on the back of his chair. Mom turned pale, her breath unsteady. Rachel let out a soft scoff, barely more than a breath, but full of disbelief. Kyle straightened, as if he finally realized he was no longer a spectator. I stayed where I was, my palms flat on the table, grounding myself. I felt calm. Too calm, like my body had run out of places to store the last year of swallow, resentment, and bone-deep exhaustion. Maybe this was what clarity felt like. Rachel was the first to break the silence. She pushed her chair back with a slight scrape across the wood floor and leaned forward, her chin lifted, her eyes sharp with irritation rather than fear. She said she could not believe all this drama over a car. She said the SUV was being used responsibly, and that I barely needed one at all. She said I would be a doctor soon, earning more money than I would know what to do with. She said her life needed stability now, and that the SUV had given her that. The way she said it made my breath catch. Not because I had not expected it, but because it was so nakedly honest. Said without shame or hesitation. Entitlement poured out of her like it was the most natural thing in the world. She said she and Kyle were building their future and could not just return the SUV without warning. She added that their apartment lease depended on Kyle having reliable transportation. She said that for me, losing the SUV meant nothing, because it had never been part of my life anyway. Kyle finally spoke then, a low voice trying to sound reasonable but dripping with self-defense. He said he relied on the SUV to get to work. He said public transportation was unreliable, and he could not afford his own car at the moment. He said he did not even realize the SUV had been meant for me because Rachel told him it was a family gift. He said he assumed everything had been cleared with Grandma. His voice cracked slightly on her name. He looked at Grandma like she held his fate in her hands, which was not entirely untrue. Grandma watched him in silence. Then she turned her gaze to Rachel, who refused to look away. It was the first time I had ever seen Rachel meet Grandma's eyes with open defiance. Most of the time, Rachel played sweet around her. Tonight, she did not bother. Grandma asked Rachel one simple question. Why did she think she had the right to take something meant for someone else? Rachel's answer came without a blink. She said it made sense. She said she was the one who needed it. She said I had always been the strong one, the stable one, the one who could survive anything. She said she was the one who struggled. She said she had felt it was fair. Hearing her say it aloud was like watching a truth I had lived under for years finally take its first breath in public. Dad jumped in, trying to shape the narrative again. He said Rachel had only taken the SUV temporarily. He said they would have discussed everything eventually. He said Grandma did not understand the nuance. He said this was a family matter. He said it would have sorted itself out with time. Mom nodded quickly, her eyes darting between Grandma and the rest of us. She said the SUV had not harmed anyone by being with Rachel. She said Rachel had needed help, and family helped one another. She said I would have my turn. She said I always ended up fine, no matter what. Gran did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her silence alone felt like a boundary none of them had ever seen her set. She told Mom that helping one child should not come at the expense of another. She told Dad that trust, once broken, did not repair itself through excuses. She told Rachel that relying on family did not justify stealing from them. She told Kyle that using the SUV was not his fault as much as the deceit that made him believe it was available. Her calmness made the words sharper. Rachel swallowed hard, but still held her posture. Then she asked Grandma something that made my stomach twist. She asked why the SUV had been meant for me at all. She asked if Grandma preferred me. She asked if I was still being treated like the golden child. Her voice cracked slightly, but the resentment was unmistakable. Gran inhaled slowly, as if she were trying to contain her disappointment. She told Rachel that this had never been about favoritism. She said the SUV had been chosen for me because my work put me at risk during night shifts in Cleveland. She said I had been walking alone at 4 in the morning. She said she wanted me safe. She said that decision did not diminish Rachel's value. She said it reflected my circumstances, not love. Rachel's eyes flickered, uncertainty showing through for the first time. Then the bitterness flooded back. She said safety was not exclusive to me. She said her life had its own challenges. She said she had felt overlooked for years. She said the SUV felt like justice for once. Gran shook her head, a gesture that carried both sorrow and finality. She said justice was not taken, it was earned. She said the SUV had been a gift freely given, not something to be seized and justified with envy. Rachel clenched her jaw. She asked what the difference was. She asked why it mattered who used the SUV. She asked why the world always seemed to bend in my direction, even when I did not ask it to. I wanted to speak then, but something inside me held back. Grandma was not finished. She turned to Dad and Mom and asked them why they had decided that Rachel's needs outweighed mine. She asked why they had never once considered calling me. She asked why they had hidden the SUV instead of telling me the truth. She asked why they had never questioned whether Rachel had the right to drive it. Dad tried to answer. He said, it was complicated. He said he had been trying to keep the peace. He said he thought telling me would only stress me out. He said I was too busy. He said he did not want to burden me. Grandma did not accept that. She told him that withholding the truth was not protection. It was manipulation. She said pretending it was for my benefit was insulting. She said the fact that he believed Rachel's comfort mattered more than my safety spoke volumes. Mom reached out as if trying to touch Grandma's arm, but Grandma did not move. Mom whispered that Rachel had always been fragile, that she needed guidance, that she had not been born with the inner strength I had, that giving her the SUV had been a way to help her stabilize. Grandma replied softly that fragility was not an excuse for entitlement. She said enabling weakness was not the same as giving support. She said parents had a responsibility to raise their children with integrity, not bias. Rachel's face flushed. She said Grandma did not understand what it was like to grow up under my shadow. She said I had always been the achiever. She said every accomplishment of mine tightened a spotlight that burned her. She said the SUV had been the first time she felt she received something that made life easier for her instead of for me. Dad nodded as if that explanation made everything reasonable, but Grandma did not sway. She said difficulty did not justify dishonesty. She said need did not replace ownership. She said wanting something did not make it yours. I felt something lift inside me at those words, something that had been pressed down for so long I had forgotten what it felt like. Rachel turned on me then. She said I should just let it go. She said I would be earning more money soon than any of them. She said one car would not matter. She said this was not worth the fight. She said she needed the SUV more than I did. She said she deserved it. The word echoed in the air. Deserved. She deserved it. There it was, the truth she had been circling all night. The belief that pulsed through her veins and shaped every action she took. A belief nurtured by years of favoritism and excuses. I finally spoke. I asked her why she deserved something that had never belonged to her. I asked her why my sacrifices meant nothing. I asked her why my safety mattered less than her convenience. I asked her why effort was rewarded with neglect, while entitlement was rewarded with gifts. Rachel laughed bitterly. She said my sacrifices were my choice. She said I had chosen a demanding career. She said I had chosen to pay off my loans aggressively. She said she should not suffer because of my ambitions. She said she should not be punished because she had not followed the same path. Kyle fidgeted at her side but said nothing. Grant exhaled slowly and told Rachel she had spent her entire life confusing support with privilege. She told her that needing help did not entitle her to steal help from others. She told her that love did not mean allowing her to mistreat her sister. She told her that this night would not end with excuses. Rachel's eyes widened as if she understood for the first time that Grandma was not changing her mind. Grandma nodded at Daniel. He reached into his leather folder and pulled out another document. He said the SUV would be collected by a towing company within 24 hours. He said Rachel and Kyle were legally prohibited from operating the vehicle from this moment on. He said failure to comply would result in charges. David erupted, calling it unnecessary. Mom begged for compromise. Rachel slammed her hand on the table, saying it was ridiculous. Kyle muttered something about his job and transportation. Gran did not raise her voice. She simply said my name. She said the SUV belonged to me. She said the time for negotiation was over. She said the car was coming home. Rachel collapsed back into her chair, her expression shaking. The entitlement drained from her face, leaving something raw and unfamiliar. Fear. Maybe realization. Maybe both. Dad looked helpless. Mom stared at the table. Kyle rubbed his forehead, suddenly pale. Grant placed her hand gently on mine. It was warm, steady, full of the quiet kind of strength I had lived without for so long. She said the SUV would be returned, and that was the moment I knew the fault lines in our family had shifted. Forever. And they would not shift back. Grant's hand rested on mine in a steady, grounding way. But before I could say a word, Daniel straightened his posture. The shift in his expression was unmistakable. Whatever came next would not be softened for anyone's comfort. The room went completely still. Daniel said that from this moment forward, Rachel and Kyle were legally barred from operating the SUV. The dealership and insurance carrier had already been notified. Any attempt to move or hide the vehicle would be documented as intentional. Misuse of property. Continued possession could be considered criminal. His voice never rose. The calmness made every word feel sharper. Dad sputtered that all of this was unnecessary. Mom begged with her eyes for someone to slow things down. Rachel stared at Daniel as if she had just learned gravity could be optional, and someone had chosen not to tell her. Kyle's jaw clenched so hard, a muscle twitched near his ear. Daniel said a towing company would arrive within the hour. The SUV would be removed from the property and held until I chose to retrieve it. Rachel gasped. Kyle shot up from his chair, pacing behind her. Rachel said it was Christmas, said they needed the SUV for work that week, said no one would even be driving it tonight. But Daniel reminded her that the SUV was mine, had been mine for nearly 11 months, and had been withheld from me without my knowledge. Delaying retrieval only protected the people who had been using it unlawfully. Gran nodded. Trust had to be restored through action, not apologies. She turned to Dad and asked if he understood. He didn't answer. He stared at the table like a student caught cheating on a test he thought no one would ever grade. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the hum of the vents. Rachel's breathing turned uneven. Kyle muttered curses under his breath about how this would ruin his week. Then headlights swept across the windows. A tow truck pulled into the driveway. Its engine rumbled low, steady, final. No one moved. Daniel stepped outside to meet the driver. Rachel bolted toward the window, shouting that they couldn't take the SUV without warning. She sprinted toward the front door as if she could physically stop the process. Kyle followed, slower but equally tense. I stayed in my seat. A strange quiet settled inside me. Not triumph, not vindication. Something emptier. Something lighter. Through the window, I watched the driver attach hooks to the SUV. Rachel waved her arms, yelling for him to stop. Kyle argued that the whole thing was blown out of proportion, but Daniel stood beside the driver, clipboard in hand, explaining calmly that everything was authorized. David eventually trudged outside, trying one last time to negotiate. Mom stayed inside, wringing her hands, as though worry alone might rewind a year of choices. The winch tightened. The SUV lifted slowly onto the flatbed. Rachel screamed that it wasn't fair. Kyle kicked snow. Dad stood off to the side, shoulders sagging. Mom leaned on the doorframe, eyes wide and defeated. And then the SUV was gone. The truck's taillights disappeared down the street. The night settled back into its cold stillness. Rachel dropped onto the porch steps, shaking. Kyle paced behind her. Dad stared at the ground. Mom closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the blow in silence. When Grandma sat back at the table, her spine looked straighter, her face calmer. Daniel returned with the same steady presence and reported that the SUV was now in secured custody. Rachel and Kyle re-entered the dining room, their faces blotchy from crying. They both looked at me like I had robbed them. Rachel muttered that she hoped I was happy. Kyle added that I had ruined their transportation. I did not answer. I felt nothing sharp enough to respond with. Only the quiet inside me continued to widen. Grandma spoke into the silence. Choices had consequences. Intentions did not erase actions. Borrowing without permission was not borrowing at all. A family should lift each other up, not steal in silence. Rachel cried harder. Kyle stared through the window. David tried to soothe Rachel, insisting things could be sorted out. Mom asked Grandma whether the legal report could be undone, even partially. Grandma raised her hand. The embarrassment was not the SUV being taken, she said. The embarrassment was everything that led to this moment. She told Mom that shielding Rachel from consequences was not kindness, but neglect. She told Dad that silence in the face of wrongdoing was participation. She said treating me like a child who needed nothing was disrespect disguised as practicality. Dad opened his mouth, but no words came. Mom wiped her eyes. Rachel hunched over the table. Kyle sat with his arms crossed, radiating resentment. Then Grandma turned toward me. From now on, she said, any financial support meant for me would be given directly to me. No intermediaries, no relayed messages, no hidden gifts. Trust had been broken and would be rebuilt with clarity, not assumptions. David bristled, insisting she was overreacting. Mom whispered the word punishment. Grandma did not waver. It was not punishment, she said. It was necessary. Transparency was the only path forward. Rachel asked if she was being cut off. Grand answered honestly. She said she was not cutting anyone off. She simply would no longer enable a life built on entitlement. Support would come with responsibility. Rachel looked confused, then defeated, then silent. Kyle pushed back his chair and muttered that he needed a drink. Rachel followed him out, wiping her face with her sleeve. David finally sat down, the weight of everything landing on him. Mom sank into the chair beside him, her hand resting weakly on his arm. Daniel gathered his documents. If the SUV issue resurfaced in any way, he said, the existing report made next steps very straightforward. He hoped the family would choose honesty. The room fell into a heavy quiet. I sat with my hands folded and let myself breathe. Deep, full breaths that felt foreign after months of shallow ones. The truth had reshaped the room, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a cold, steady settling of reality. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel like someone who had won back something precious. It felt like a boundary had finally been acknowledged. A weight had finally been set down. Karma had not shouted tonight. It was not punished with spectacle. It had simply arrived in the form of consequences, long overdue. The SUV was gone from this house. The lies were exposed. The pattern of silence had been broken. And in the space left behind, something new began to form. Something steady. A beginning I had not expected. For the first time since the bus rides, the night shifts, the exhaustion, I felt the faintest ease in my chest. Enough to breathe without that tightness. Enough to feel that maybe the next part of my life would be built on truth, not on the things kept from me. Grandma touched my arm gently. She whispered that we should get some air. I nodded and followed her toward the front door. The cold Wisconsin night wrapped around us as we stepped outside. The kind of cold that makes the world seem strangely still. Snow, they melted on my cheeks almost as soon as they landed. For the first time in a year, I saw the empty driveway without the SUV and felt something shift inside me. It was like I was looking at the outline of a wound that had just been cleaned for the first time. Not healed yet, but finally visible. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. I told her she had done more for me in one night than my own parents had done. In years. She reached for my hand and squeezed it, and we stayed there for a while, listening. Homes on the street. Eventually, Gran said the SUV would be delivered to a local holding lot in the morning. She said Daniel had arranged everything. She said I nodded, though it still felt surreal, like part of me did not know how to accept something I'd been denied for so much long. The next morning, I drove with Grandma to the lot where the SUV had been taken. The sky was gray, the kind that stretches endlessly without revealing whether snow or rain will fall. When the attendant handed me the keys, my fingers closed around them with a trembling that surprised me. The metal was cold, but the weight felt right. We walked to the parking spot, and there it was, a dark metallic blue SUV, polished, quiet, waiting. My name was still on the paperwork. My name. For the first time since the truth surfaced, I let myself feel. I opened the driver's door and climbed inside. The scent of leather and new car cleaner was still faintly there despite nearly a year of use. On the passenger floor, a stray receipt from a gas station caught my eye. probably left there by Rachel or Kyle. I picked it up, folded it, and put it in the small trash compartment. It felt symbolic in a way I could not fully describe. Gran stood outside, watching me with a soft smile. When I rolled down the window, she said it suited me. I told her I was not sure how it would feel to drive it. She nodded. She said it might feel complicated at first, but that did not make the car any less mine. I turned the ignition. The engine hummed to life with a smoothness that felt almost foreign. I had spent years listening to bus engines sputter and groan, and now this quiet strength vibrated beneath my hands. I sat there for a moment, letting the warmth spread through the cabin. Gran leaned in and told me she would meet me at the house later. She wanted me to take my time. I thanked her and began to drive. The roads were clear, lined with snowbanks from last night's storm. I drove slowly at first, feeling out the weight of the vehicle, the way it responded to my touch. I passed familiar landmarks, the old church on Maple Street, the bakery where we used to buy Christmas cookies when Rachel and I were little, the curve in the road where the trees arched overhead like a tunnel. As I drove, something settled inside me. Not joy, not triumph, just a quiet certainty, a restoration of something I did not know I had lost. I unlocked the SUV and climbed inside. The heater warmed the cabin quickly. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, breathing deeply. It was unbelievable how much difference one car made, how much safer I felt, how much more human. The drive home was quiet. Snow flurries drifted across the streetlights. The city looked softer, calmer. When I pulled into the lot of my apartment building, I turned off the engine and let the silence wash over me. I held the steering wheel gently, feeling like I had stepped into a version of my life that had been waiting for me all along. Justice, I realized, did not feel like fireworks. It did not feel like victory music or applause or payback. It felt like this: the absence of fear, the return of something stolen, the ability to breathe without carrying the weight of unfairness. Back in Madison, the aftermath rippled through my family. Dad avoided me for days. He barely spoke when I walked into a room, and when he did, his words were clipped and cautious. He seemed to be waiting for someone to tell him things would go back to normal. No one did. Mom became quiet too. She hovered around the edges of conversations, listening but not participating. She did small things like making extra food whenever I was visiting, or folding laundry that was not hers. But she never addressed what had happened. It was as if she believed silence could repair what words had broken. Rachel was angrier. She blamed Kyle for not defending her. She blamed Grandma for being too strict. She blamed me for not forgiving easily. I never responded. It was not my role to soothe her anymore. Kyle stopped visiting altogether. I heard from my extended family that he borrowed a friend's car to get to work, and that they were both struggling. I felt nothing but a distant sadness for the state they had put themselves in. Gran became my constant. She visited me in Cleveland once a month. We talked more than we ever had before. She told me stories about her own childhood, about mistakes she made, about people who taught her lessons the hard way. She told me justice hardly ever looked dramatic. She said the real version was quiet, almost invisible, felt only by the person who needed it most. I believed her. One evening, after a long shift, I sat in the SUV outside my apartment with the engine running softly. I thought about how easily my life could have been different if the truth had not surfaced. How I would have continued to carry everything alone, believing that needing nothing was strength. How Rachel would have continued to believe she deserved anything she wanted. How my parents would have kept their quiet favoritism tucked behind polite smiles. The restoration of something stolen changed more than just transportation. It shifted the foundation beneath my relationships. It revealed fractures I had pretended not to see. It taught me that nothing good comes from silence, even when silence feels easier. Justice did not need to be loud. It needed to be real. When I finally stepped out of the SUV and walked toward my apartment building, the cold air touched my face in a way that no longer felt hostile. I pulled my jacket close and took a slow breath. For the first time in a long time, I felt exactly where I was supposed to be. I stepped out of the SUV and walked toward my apartment building, the cold brushing my face in a way that no longer felt hostile. I climbed the stairs, unlocked my door, and set my bag down on the kitchen counter. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that had once felt lonely, but now felt earned. I turned on a single lamp, watched its warm light spill across the room, and let the stillness settle into me. A full year passed after that Christmas, a year that traced itself through long hospital corridors, early morning pages from nurses, quiet moments in the on-call room, and slowly growing confidence in who I was. I kept living the way I always had, careful with money, careful with energy, and careful about where I placed my trust. But the difference was that now, no one questioned why I lived the way I did. No one laughed at me for being practical. No one rolled their eyes when I said I could not join a weekend getaway or a dinner out because I was focusing on my student loans. People seemed to understand something had shifted. Maybe they felt it in the way I walked. Maybe they sensed it in the way I spoke. Or maybe it was simply that once a person learns what they deserve, they stop accepting the bare minimum, and everyone around them feels the change. By the time late fall rolled around, I was in my final months of residency at the hospital in Cleveland. My schedule was still brutal, but I knew how to navigate it. I knew when to rest, when to push, when to ask for help. I knew when to assert myself with the attendings and when to stand firm with patients who were scared or stubborn. I had grown into my role without even realizing it. One afternoon in October, after a particularly long shift that started before sunrise and stretched into the evening, I walked out to the parking lot where the SUV waited for me. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the whole sky in an orange glow. I unlocked the car, slid into the driver's seat, and just sat there for a moment. It was still just a vehicle. Nothing more. It was not the symbol Rachel had treated it as. It was not the leverage Dad tried to hold. It was not the secret Mom tried to soften. It was simply a way to get home safely after saving other people's lives for 13 hours straight. And that was enough. That was everything. I drove home slowly that night, feeling a calm pride I had never let myself feel before. Not about the SUV, but about the life I was building, piece by piece. The life no one had handed to me. The life I earned, even while my own family overlooked everything I carried. Things with my parents had become a polite distance. They apologized once, months after the tow truck had left with the SUV, but it was the kind of apology that stayed on the surface. Dad said he thought he was doing what made sense for the family. Mom said she worried I would think they favored Rachel, but did not know how to balance everything. They both said they loved me, and I chose to let the words sit where they landed. I did not push them away. I did not draw them closer. I just let the relationship settle into a new shape, one that did not ask me to shrink or disappear. Rachel, meanwhile, had a harder year. She and Kyle fought constantly. Their relationship eventually unraveled under the weight of shared entitlement and real-world pressure. Without the SUV, Rachel struggled to keep the job she had taken pride in. She bounced between part-time positions, most of them in retail, trying to stabilize herself. She called me once in the summer, her voice tired, asking how I managed to stay so calm and steady. I told her the truth. I told her that nothing in my life was ever handed to me. So I had learned long ago that the only stable ground I had was the ground I built myself. We did not become close, but we understood each other a little better after that. Grandma stayed the anchor she had always been. She called me every week, whether I was between shifts or in the hospital cafeteria or walking from the parking lot with my bag slung over my shoulder. She visited whenever she could, staying for weekends in a small Airbnb near my apartment so we could talk in. The mornings over coffee before my shifts. She said she had never regretted giving me the SUV. She said she never regretted setting the truth in motion. She said family was not about who you protected, but who you chose to stand beside when the truth came out. I believed her. Every time. In early winter, she came to watch me give a presentation in the resident conference room. It was a small thing, nothing glamorous, just a case review I had spent weeks preparing. But when I saw her sitting in the back row, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes bright with pride, something inside me softened and opened in a way I had forgotten was possible. Afterward, she hugged me tightly and said she saw the doctor I was becoming. She said she knew how hard I had fought for this future. She said I had earned every inch of it with integrity. On the drive home that day, I saw snow beginning to fall again. The flakes drifted down against the windshield like a memory passing through. Time. I drove carefully, watching the roads, letting the quiet hum of the engine ground me. Somewhere between the hospital and my apartment, I realized I no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone. Not to Dad, not to Mom, not to Rachel, not to the attendings who doubted residents, not even to myself. The past year has rearranged so many parts of me. It had shown me what justice felt like, what betrayal looked like, and what it meant to reclaim something stolen. But most importantly, it taught me something much quieter. Revenge does not have to be destruction. Revenge can simply be restoration. It can be taking back what was always yours. It can be refusing to shrink. It can be standing up in a room where you were taught to stay silent. It can be looking at the people who underestimated you and choosing dignity over fury. It can be walking into your own life without apology. The SUV parked beneath the streetlight as I pulled into my space. I turned off the ignition and sat there for a moment, letting the silence fill the cabin. I touched the steering wheel lightly. It was no longer a symbol of betrayal or pain or unfairness. It was just a small part of a larger journey I had chosen for myself. When I stepped out of the car and walked toward my apartment, I felt calm. I felt whole. I felt ready for whatever came next. My residency was almost complete. My loan balance was slowly shrinking. My career was forming its own shape. And I was building a life not because someone finally gave me permission, but because I had decided I deserved one. Before heading inside, I stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the quiet windows of my apartment. The air was cold, but it no longer felt isolating. It felt clean. A year ago, I arrived at Christmas dinner on a bus, tired, stretched thin, and unaware of everything that had been taken from me. Today, I stood in my own strength, not louder, not angrier, but steadier. And that, I realized, was the real revenge. If you've ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you're listening from.